Welcome, everyone. I'm here with some of my esteemed colleagues who are going to be talking in our ResearchTalk Qualitative Conversations with Kevin Swartout today. He's talking to us about collaborative qualitative research from data to dialogue to discovery. And it's not only a topic he's been invested in for a while, his thoughts kind of keep expanding and evolving on it in really helpful ways, but it's the title of a course he's teaching with us at our Qualitative Research Summer Intensive on August 7th of this year. And registration's available for that at the end of the recording. You'll have a page that will show you the link for you to be able to do that. We'll also have the link available in the description of the video. I'm Ray Maeda, president of ResearchTalk. I not only advise people on qualitative methods and work with folks in several different formats across all sorts of substantive topics, but also do a lot of research on my own. Right now, kind of fascinated with returning to research on the sociology of friendship, which has been kind of fun. I'm going to ask my colleagues here assisting and sharing the conversation first to introduce themselves, then we'll go to Kevin and he'll tell us a little bit about himself, and we'll start our conversation on collaborative qualitative research at that point. So Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ray. I'm Jeff Petruzzelli with ResearchTalk. I'm a qualitative research specialist here, and I've been here since 2001.
Thank you, Jeff. Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Mihas. I'm a qualitative researcher and consultant at the Odom Institute at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm also co-teaching a course at QRSI this summer on coding and analysis with my colleague Karen Campbell.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, and Kevin, if you want to start us out with just a brief introduction of yourself, and then we'll dig into our topic of the day.
Thanks, Ray. My name is Kevin Swartout. I have been a consultant with ResearchTalk for going on 20 years now. And for 12 of those years, I served as a faculty member in a department of psychology and public health. And I also do a lot of climate assessment and research in the best ways to prevent violence and harassment and to promote, more civil discourse and engagement. So, but it's always fun to participate in these intensive and workshops and things like that to learn about other important research. It's fun to see how these tools that I use in my research and that I talk with my colleagues here about all the time can apply to other research areas and learn about all the exciting and impactful ways that qualitative is being carried out there across disciplines.
And not only are you an expert in methodology, you're also a little bit of a geek when it comes to research methods, like
a little bit. And that might come through in this conversation. We'll see.
It's a good place for it. So we at the team at Odom Research, UNC's Odom Institute and ResearchTalk are offering 18 courses this summer. And just to kind of help people get a handle on what should I take, how do I choose, we've grouped those into different categories. And the collaborative qualitative research course is in a group titled Refining Your Qualitative Lens. And we just want to hear a little bit from you on what is it about this topic and the material you're putting forward that will help people refine their qualitative lens and think a little differently about how they may have been approaching the work.
Yeah, thanks. So it doesn't matter how long you've been engaged with qualitative inquiry. You could be a seasoned pro with decades of experience, or you could be fairly new to the space. We all come in with a certain lens based on our lived experiences, our education and other forms of training, past qualitative research projects that we may have led or contributed to. And that's important and valuable. And across ResearchTalk's offerings, we really focus on, utilizing that lens and not apologizing for it. It's important. Everyone brings something unique and impactful to their research. And obviously, everyone brings a different lens. And in this collaborative space, we're really going to talk about utilizing not just your own lens, but the lenses of your colleagues, your advisors, your advisees, to really strengthen any qualitative research project, and how to, as you work through that project, how to refine your own lens. We can't necessarily see our participants or our transcripts or their journeys through someone else's eyes, literally, but through the act and the art of collaboration, we can gain new perspectives that maybe we weren't trained in, we didn't experience personally. But again, we can see how they move the stories in our qualitative research, and they can impact people at the end of the day. So I would say that in this course specifically, that would be how we would focus on it, is really understanding those different lenses, seeing how they come together, seeing how they can be complementary and additive. And then ultimately the goal is to produce even more impactful findings because you have those collaborative lenses.
For the next thing that we've been thinking about as we, look forward to hearing more about your course, I just wanted to repeat the full title because I think it'll help not only you, but listeners kind of think about what we're moving next. Again, not just collaborative qualitative research, but from data to dialogue to discovery. And we had a lot of fun kind of toying with you and thinking aloud about where will that title land. So when we think about that and, first and second part of it, in what ways for people in the course do you feel like it's going to help people ready to move forward? Some maybe, range of stuff you could talk about, immediate takeaways, long-term benefits, how it expands their qualitative mind. Some of this you've been addressing already. Beyond theory, action in the world, enhancing research outcomes. So, this is not a pure teamwork course. It's really kind of, collaboration. But, when we add in that from data to dialogue to discovery, tell us what your thoughts are about how it's going to help people move forward with their work, immediate and long-term.
Especially I think the key piece of the title that's relevant to the animating question here is that dialogue piece. We're really going to talk about sort of a more figurative dialogue that a researcher has with their data, their transcripts, their participants, if they're actually conducting interviews or focus groups. But we're also going to focus on the dialogues that happen among those collaborators, like you mentioned. So from data to dialogue to discovery, those are the big points. Again, it's easy to kind of, for our minds to go from data to discovery, which is important as well, findings to interpretations to actions, things like that. But we really want to live in this course in that space in between. How can those discoveries, how can we make the most out of those data, first of all? And again, having those the additional lenses and approaches and perspectives is really going to open doors for everyone on what's possible with a given data set. And that's going to happen through that dialogue. I think a key point of the course is it doesn't necessarily happen always organically. You can't just put myself and my colleague Paul here together and have us analyze the same transcripts, and all of a sudden you have this collaborative process, because we could be just working in a parallel streams, never between shall meet, and then we each kind of come out with our own set of findings, and it's almost like two completely different projects. That might be, there have been some really interesting cases in qualitative of people who have done that, but again, it's an intentional approach, and not everyone necessarily wants to do that. They want to kind of integrate the findings across the researchers. And to do that, you really need to be intentional about that dialogue. And then again, those discoveries are going to be richer, like I mentioned before, because you've got the multiple lenses that really interact in meaningful ways throughout the process. And we're going to talk about ways to really ground this and make this a very intentional throughout a collaborative project.
It's interesting, Kevin, as you're talking, you're making me think of a couple of different things. One is, you and Paul are also members of the ResearchTalk consulting team, as you both mentioned. And we do one phrase we use a lot, and Jeff and I always work together on all the work we do, is entertain possibilities. And we want to really kind of not get our clients, we don't want them stuck at a point where they're kind of closed. But so it seems like this vehicle of dialogue especially is kind of not only a way to entertain possibilities, but you're making me think of the relationship as we mentor folks, not just students, colleagues, whatever it might be. And oftentimes, especially in the PhD student realm, it starts out kind of more directive, but then it kind of gets more collegial and all this stuff. But
Mhm.
it seems like part of this is saying, hey, there's something to that spirit that some people just abandon once they move out of those environments. But it's the role of dialogue in entertaining possibilities is just seems like a tremendous resource for folks.
Absolutely. You saying that brought up an example from my research. If it's okay if I share that
Yeah, that's great. Love
with the
it.
group here. Yeah. So speaking of mentorship, not too long ago, I was mentoring a doctoral student in a psychology program, and she was working on her dissertation project focused on teen mothers who had experienced adverse childhood experiences. Child abuse, child sexual abuse, some bad stuff. And then they themselves had become teen mothers. And the interview set, it was a secondary data analysis, was focused on their experiences and how those experiences sort of transitioned into their decision making around how they're parenting their own children. And we were really looking for, some kind of journeys, some information on the pathways that these teen mothers took throughout their lives. And again, to your point, this was a very specific collaboration. The student was working on a dissertation and it needed to be, to a certain extent, some independent thought. But as her advisor, I served as a sounding board. So she would analyze the data, and then we would meet regularly and kind of talk through what she was seeing throughout the process. So yes, I think it really meets what we're talking about here. We had an ongoing dialogue. Her thinking was moving forward every week when we checked in, and I was learning more about her project. And I was really able to take the positionality of an audience member, just a learner, and she was teaching me about the lives of these young women. And I was able to, at the same time, I was thinking through the best ways to communicate what is, very complex and thick and rich information in a way that is manageable and accessible to hopefully a broad audience. And what we developed over, several meetings and a fairly constant dialogue was this idea. She came to me and she said there were kind of three pillars to success for these teen mothers. One was, having secure housing. The other was some level of support from family members. And then the third was financial security. It didn't have to be current financial security. It could just be the prospect they could be enrolled in college. They could be in a technical training program or something like that. So just the prospect of financial security on the horizon seemed to be enough. And if they had all three of those factors intact, they seemed to be fairly stable. If they had two of them, they were hanging on. And if they had one or none of those things, they were really struggling to get by, struggling with their parenting. What we like to do with all of our qualitative work, both in my lab, and I think I share this with my colleagues here, is not just throw things into buckets. So I was not, we've all seen a lot of projects that sort of end there. It's like, here's the three things you need to know about these teen mothers. But I said, no, we're going to dig deeper. So we really looked at how those concepts were related, and we developed this metaphor collaboratively of 3 points of contact. So if you're climbing a ladder or if you're a rock climber, you have to move up. So you can't, if you keep, 2 hands and 2 feet, grounded on a ladder or on a rock that you're climbing, you will hold on, but you won't move up, right? There's no way for you to move up. So at one point you have to be transitioning with a hand or a foot to move upwards. So, but the most stable kind of placement is going to be 3 points of contact, and we really use that metaphor to kind of re-examine the data and really understand these teen mothers' positions as they navigated some really obviously difficult challenges, coming to terms with their experiences and also making parenting decisions of their own. And that metaphor that we developed really helped us to communicate not just to my colleagues on the dissertation committee, but also to a broad audience through a series of conference presentations. A lot of fairly complex information with this fairly simple metaphor of kind of 3 points of contact while climbing. We developed some visualization, some graphics, and it was really fun to see my student's face, like as we started talking. She was a little skeptical at first, but we really talked it through. And then, I think the very next meeting, she came and she had already, drawn this really nice kind of schematic of a rock climber with the themes and some quotations, in the visualization, and it really started to take shape, and it was really fun to see. And I wouldn't have been able to assist her if she hadn't put in the work, analyzing all the data, going through everything, communicating and refining her ideas, using her lens and her expertise to analyze all the data. And then I had the fortunate position to come in kind of and say, like, okay, what's the best way to communicate this effectively to a broad audience? And that all came together, I think, really nicely.
It's great to listening to you, and it really shows this piece. And Paul's going to get to a little bit about some of the stuff you've done with teamwork, which has been you've given lots of thought to. But in teamwork, oftentimes people get stuck in this kind of like, dividing labor, but there's a whole different story. Even among the four of us, if Jeff's seeking advice from Paul or I'm talking to you about something, that act of thinking aloud is so productive. And oftentimes, I know, Kevin, you and I have this a lot when we're working on stuff. One of us is kind of in a quandary, but if you're kind of there trying to figure out in presenting it to me and in that back and forth, you wind up at a great place. But I almost do nothing. But just that act for her of being able to have this invested, knowledgeable audience member seems that it just kind of got her to such a productive point, it's great, Paul, right? It's kind of this collaboration is an active, engaged process, which I don't know that we do enough as qualitative researchers, right? You and I, part of you, Paul, because you and I do so much advising with folks, Jeff too, that it's great to do that process and just sit there and people are like, thank you so much, Paul. But oftentimes it's no, this is all you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's pretty powerful. Paul, you were we're going to pass over to you. You've been thinking a lot about this in relation to Kevin's experience. Let me let you put forward the next question for Kev.
Sure. So, Kevin, you have taught teamwork, qualitative teamwork in both professional development and academic settings. Can you talk a little bit about how that teaching combined with your research experience led to the creation of this course?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, absolutely. I've really tried to, I think my publication record shows that I think my only sole authored publication was my own dissertation going way back. And I remember after I finished that, got through the peer review process, I said, I never want to do this again. It's just a lot. And, there are just so many, like Ray was just talking about, so many decisions where it would be so helpful to have another person to bounce ideas off of. Even responding to peer reviewers, it's like, okay, will you take this one? So I think, I have personally found that collaborative research has been much more enjoyable, frankly. And I would also say that my collaborative projects have been more impactful on my fields, just because they include multiple lenses throughout the process. I am not ashamed to say that I don't have all the answers and that I'm right all the time. So it's nice to again have those sounding boards, have those collaborators that can point you in different directions, kind of interrogate your approach and a nice and professional way, hopefully, but really make sure that you're thinking through everything and you're not missing any key details that would ultimately set your project back or potentially lead to you missing a really important finding or interpretation. And it's a way to learn as well. I've learned so much from my colleagues. I've had the good fortune to collaborate with people outside of my field. I'm a social psychologist by training. I've collaborated with several clinical psychologists on projects related to pediatric pain management, on projects related to trying to reduce and prevent substance use. And I just learned so much from my collaborators and how they've been trained and how they approach projects and their knowledge of their own fields. And then it's nice to bring my knowledge, whether it be subject matter expertise, methodology expertise. I've served as the qualitative and mixed methods expert on several large scale projects. So, those are necessarily collaborative just because the scope is so large that you couldn't just have one person, cover all the bases. So yeah, I would say, a combination of like I've been saying, the project is just better in my experience when you have multiple voices in the room, multiple lenses. And then, it's just a learning experience for the researchers involved. That's really been great.
Yeah, we've known each other for such a long time, Kevin. I think your mind always has been interdisciplinary in nature. And what's exciting about this process and hearing you talk about it and doing a little bit ourselves is it really talks to how in our world, especially in qualitative, this kind of interdisciplinary mindset, the approach of getting there is just it's necessary. And it seems that the kinds of things that undergird this class that's kind of coming together with your experience really not just helps people get through any given project. Earlier, you were talking about the benefits and takeaways and how this moves forward. I think another one that you're just really exposed to is it helps people move in their own work and in their own experience to think more interdisciplinary with everything, which is just such a powerful tool.
Absolutely. And I mean, I even think of, the projects that I've collaborated with you on I'm going to out you as a social psychologist on
That's right.
the sociology side. We speak the same language probably 80% of the time, but that 20% I'm focused on an individual and you're focused on a group of people. And that's been just so fun to kind of play with. And, when we're analyzing data together, just kind of compare perspectives. And again, there's just so much overlap, so much similarity, but I think of our conversations going way back when, we're kind of geeking out. And it's like, hey, are you familiar with this theory? And
Right.
Soch talks about how groups impact individuals. And I'm like, we're just kind of trading citations basically. And, again, it's really helpful to get, I know the phrase 360-degree view gets overused, but it's nice just to work with other people that just view, they're well trained. They're just as well trained, if not more well trained than you are, and they just have a slightly different viewpoint on things. And again, going back to that dialogue piece, sometimes you have to dig for it. Sometimes it doesn't come out with a quick exchange, or if you're just exchanging written drafts of a manuscript by email, you really have to kind of sit down and talk about the data. What am I taking away from reviewing this transcript? What are you taking away? Kind of what are you seeing rising to the top? And then really thinking when it comes time to think about how it what you're finding in a specific project relates to theory, or the literature in various fields. Like that's where it really comes up, right? Like in my example, where it's like, well, it makes me think about this. And I'm like, I've never heard of that before. So, again, that opportunity to both make your project better, to make it interdisciplinary, which I know a lot of scholars are trying to do these days, is not just focus on their singular domain that they've been trained in, and then ultimately, you if you're not careful, you end up learning something along the way.
Yeah, it's great. And, the example when you were talking about you as a psychological social psychologist, me as a sociological, people use the term bridging a lot and kind of moving, but people think of that bridge as just moving from one place to another. You're not trying to move me to the psychological edge. I'm not moving
No.
you to the sociological. We're doing a little bit both, but what we're doing is living in that bridge. And that bridge is exciting, even when we think about bridges in real life. I always think about the Chesapeake Bay Bridge and Tunnel, and all of a sudden you're like, the bridge isn't there. And then you're like, what? But that vantage point you get when you're actually on the bridge is like, hey, look out the window. There's a lot of really great stuff going on right here on the bridge. It's cool. And speaking of great stuff, we're going to shift gears a bit from the collaborative, and Jeff's going to close with a more general thing about Kevin Swartout, the qualitative researcher. So
Yeah, so Kevin, as we finish up here, if you kind of think back over your career as a qualitative researcher, can you think of something that you wish someone had told you when you first started out? So sort of if I if I knew then what I know now type of question.
Absolutely. And to answer that question, Jeff, I'm going to borrow a phrase that I'm pretty sure I learned from Ray or you, Jeff, and that's get out of your own way. When you get as much education as typically you people get to to be in a research career, it's really easy to overthink things and to you just I like to call it geniusing things. I need to be the genius in the room. I need to figure this out, and you just end up working too hard. You overinterpret, you get away from participants' words if you're analyzing transcripts, and you just sort of get in your own way, and you end up working too hard. That's a lot. It's exhausting. So I wish, and luckily I met the two of you and Paul fairly early on in my career. So luckily I didn't get too far along before I got this advice, but just get out of your own way. Take the data for what they are. Take what they give you. We work so hard to collect qualitative data, and if we're doing a secondary analysis, it's usually not easy to get a hold of those valuable data sources. So just take let the data be your guide is another research talk kind of mantra, and that's been really impactful in my work because it just kind of releases you. It takes a lot of the stress, honestly, out of the qualitative research process. And it is a little bit harder when you're working with one or more collaborators because you all need to be on the same page of that. On that, you can't necessarily have one person that's trying to genius the project while another person's letting the data be their guide. So just making sure you have collaborators that are on the same page. But once you do that, it unlocks a world of possibilities with your qualitative work, and it makes it more legitimate. It helps you be more believable because it doesn't matter, how people receive your work. They can like it, they cannot like it at the end of the day. But if they ask you to justify something or to legitimize something, you can very quickly, if you're rooted in the data and you're letting the data guide you, you can go to your notes, and you can pull out quotation after quotation that is underpinning what you're saying and what your interpretations are. And then, basically, I like to say, whether it's a journal reviewer or someone at a conference, they can disagree all they want, but they're not going to be disagreeing with me, Kevin. They're going to be disagreeing with my participants and what they said in the in the study. They're going to be disagreeing with the text that we analyzed, not the researcher who analyzed it.
Beautiful. I did note something there, Kevin, not only the strength of what you said, but you did something sociologists do frequently is
Uh-oh.
you took a noun and made it into a verb. Genius.
Geniusing, yes.
It was genius for you to make genius a noun and a verb. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for the thoughtful conversation. Thank you, of course, to Paul and to Jeff. We're going to wrap up here and keep an eye on our YouTube channel because there are a couple other conversations with Kevin you'll find there as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. My pleasure.